Yeah, you're all set. Go ahead.
Hi. Good. Hey guys, welcome back. McNally and Anello here. This is where we left off last time. We talked about Darwin's theory of natural selection, and as you remember, he said that organisms produce more offspring that can survive. All the offspring are different, and they compete for resources, which leads to only the ones with the best traits surviving, and eventually all those traits will lead to evolutions of new species. So that's kind of a recap of where we were. Today we're going to move on to what Darwin didn't know.
All right, hey guys, how you doing? Just trying to find somewhere to hide this thumbnail here. I guess it's gonna be in the way no matter where I put it. Do you see where I'm moving us around, or you don't see that?
I don't see any of that.
All right, you're gonna get dizzy when you watch it. I just moved us all over the screen. All right, so we got to remember Darwin. He came up with his theory well before we knew anything about DNA and mutations. So what Darwin didn't know was he couldn't explain where the sources of the variations came from. So although he could say that all the finches were different or all the tortoises had different shells, he didn't know what made them different. Okay, and we now know that the differences are a result of sexual reproduction producing variations by recombination of the genetic material, crossing over, which is when the traits kind of swap from one allele to the next, and the production of different gametes by both the male and the female. Also, what he didn't know is that random mutations could occur during replication, and which could result in new traits. So, although he knew there was differences, he didn't know where the differences came from. And down here at the bottom, you see a lot of these scientists: Watson, Crick, and Rosalind Franklin. Mr. McNally, do you know the third guy here?
He's a British guy, doesn't he look like he's British?
You said, I remember you saying that last year, yes, and then the British guy. But these are the scientists that found out the information that let us know the reasons behind Darwin's idea of that the variations existed. These are the guys and girls responsible for finding out that information.
All right, so here's just an example of some of those genetic differences. If you'll remember, during sexual reproduction in meiosis, the genes, the chromosomes line up in the middle of the nucleus, and sometimes their pieces of information swap. So no two chromosomes and no two sperm cells and no two egg cells will ever be the same. So every offspring that's produced by a sexually reproducing organism will always be different, which is why you don't look exactly like your brothers and sisters. And then the other thing that happens is sometimes mutations occur. A C is always supposed to pair up with a G, and an A is always supposed to pair up with a T. But sometimes those things get flipped around or messed up during the process of DNA replication, and new gene sequences emerge, which could lead to new traits. And sometimes those are great traits, and they get passed on to future generations if they're helpful. That sound good, Mr. Nello?
As good as I'd expect from you.
All right, moving on.
All right, so let me move my thumbnail here. So we're going to talk about geographic isolation, and this is one of the
I like
ways.
the way our pictures lined up with me above you. That kind of makes sense to the kids. They're used to seeing me at a higher level.
That's really funny, Mr. McNally. But since I'm screen recording, I have us parallel.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, so we're next to each other.
Gotcha.
Nice try.
That's so funny.
All right, so geographic isolation. So if the mutations did occur, it might cause the species to evolve together, but how do new species arise? So when populations of one species become separated and separated by either ocean or mountain ranges that they cannot cross, if those populations get separated and those mutations begin to build up in the new population, so let's say on this large island here, there was one species of bird, and then on this other island way over here, San Cristobal, there's another population of that same species. We're going to say, for argument's sake, that the birds cannot cross this. They cannot migrate from island to island. So, however they got separated, now mutations are going to occur in this population, and mutations are going to occur in this population. And the beneficial traits on this island could be very different than the beneficial traits on this island. So, over time, the type of mutations that become more abundant in the population in one place are very different than the type of mutations that become abundant in another place. So if these populations stay separated long enough, they could actually undergo enough genetic change that they are no longer the same species. That if they ever were to be brought back together, let's say on the middle island, that they would no longer be able to reproduce because they're totally separate species at this point. And we're not talking about a couple of generations, we're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of generations, hundreds of thousands of years.
Evolution is a very slow process in most cases. So, how does the rate of evolution change? Like I just said, in most species, large species, humans, complex animals, it's very slow. But there are times when it can be quicker. So, where there are many why does it do that? Where there are many variations, organisms can evolve much quicker than where there are few variations. So, in sexual reproduction, there's a lot more chance for variation. So, that could lead to a quicker rate of evolution. Also, organisms that reproduce quickly evolve faster than those that reproduce slowly. So you think of something big like a blue whale or an elephant that has a long lifespan and it takes many, many years for them to become sexually mature and then to have offspring. Their reproduction is going to be slower than like a mouse who reaches maturity in a couple of months and can start reproducing within a year. So the rate of reproduction also affects how fast organisms can evolve. And the other thing, and this is probably one of the most important ones that Mr. Anello was kind of pointing to on those islands, is that when the environment changes, that can really rapidly increase the rate of evolution. Because if a species is in an environment where where there's a mutation or some kind of change that allows it to survive in a rapidly changing environment, it will adapt much quicker. But if an organism cannot adapt, if it doesn't have enough variation, it'll probably just die out and become extinct. So when the environment changes, species that have good variations will adapt and be able to survive there and pass those traits on to their new offspring.
Mr. McNally, is it true that you're actually filming from the Galapagos right now?
I am in the Galapagos, yes. You can hear the finches.
I can hear the birds, yes.
Yeah, there's only two types of finches on the island I'm in. I might switch to another island and another presentation. You'll hear different bird calls.
Oh, nice.
They've adapted to a different environment.
Let us know if a tortoise walks by.
Sadly, this island doesn't have any tortoises. They've all been hunted to extermination.
Oh.
So, but I will, if I find one, I'll let you know. All right, so this is just a grid showing you what we already talked about. Many variations leads to rapid evolution. Few variations and asexual reproduction. I think we can skip this slide, Mr. Nella. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right. So this is just a better chart, I think, of the rate of evolution. These are some things that increase evolution. Many variations, fast reproduction, and a changing environment. Factors that decrease evolution is when there's few variations, when an organism reproduces very slowly, and if the environment stays the same for a long period of time, there's no need to change, and organisms tend to not.
Now, when you say decrease evolution, you mean like not that it goes backwards, but that it's just slowing down. You know, evolution still occurs, it just occurs much more slowly on the column in the right, over here, with these factors than it does on the column with these factors, correct?
Correct. Very good.
All right, so do you want to look at... Oh, okay.
Look at the question?
Well, let's read it to them, and I'm trying to find somewhere to hide. Oh, this is good. How do you guys like... Oh!
Do you want to read it?
All right, so it says, which organism would evolve quicker? We got species A reproduces asexually in an unstable environment. Species B, asexually in a stable environment. Species C, sexually in a stable environment. And species D, reproduces sexually in an unstable environment. So to find the organism that could evolve the quickest, we need one that's has a lot of variation, reproduces fast, and is in a changing environment. So many variations is going to come with sexual reproduction, so I'm thinking it's species C or D. And then a changing environment would be one that's unstable. So to me, it looks like species D would have the highest rate of evolution.
I would agree.
All right. Let's see what else we got here.
All right, so variations in evolution. You saw this a lot already in the peppered moth experiment, so that's kind of what this is talking about, where there is variation, different kinds of traits can emerge, and that could lead to a divergence or a change in the species over time. And some variations that occur are fur color, the amount of chlorophyll in a plant, or the shape of a wing on a bird. I mean, there's millions of different variations that could occur. The environment, as Darwin pointed out, when the The environment will decide which of those traits are the most favorable, which is why you tend to have a lot of animals with white fur evolve in areas where there's a lot of snow cover during the year, like polar bears and Arctic foxes. And the favorable traits will survive, and those organisms will grow up and produce more offspring. The unfavorable traits will not survive, so they would decrease, but the favorable traits will increase in future generations.
Very good.
All right.
All right, so this is kind of tying in evolution to a problem that we see today. I'm just trying to. My biggest uh, challenge here is trying to find somewhere where this goes that is not in the way of the words, but
But with the YouTube, where our faces
where our
go?
faces are, yeah.
Well, they probably just want to look at our faces anyway, wouldn't you think?
We do
That's
full
what they're
screen
looking-
on them.
What?
We just do full screen on the faces.
Well, yeah, just minimize the text.
All right, so this resistant gene concept, it kind of applies to two aspects of our real life situations here. The first being pesticides used to kill pests, maybe by farmers, and the second would be medication used by humans to fight bacterial infections. So let's talk about it. This one kind of has the pesticide example here, where if a farmer were to use a pesticide to eradicate the insects that were kind of feasting on his crops, what would happen is, or what could happen is, the pesticide might kill, let's say, 99% of the insects. But that leaves 1%, and those 1%, they have some kind of resistance in their DNA that allows them to survive the chemical. And what happens is they're the 1% that's going to reproduce and produce the next generation. So the next time the farmer uses his pesticide spray, it might only kill 70% of them of the insects. And now you have 30% resistance. And in the next generation, there's even more resistance. All right, because the ones that are resistant, obviously, are the ones that are surviving, and then the ones that are reproducing. Now, one word we don't like to use here is immune. We don't say that the insects are immune to the pesticide. We say that they're resistant because it's not an immune response. Their immune system isn't fighting it off. It's just the effects of the pesticide just don't really work on that particular insect. So over time, we see the entire population could have this trait.
So, Mr. Nello, is the pesticide causing the genes to change in the insects?
No. What's happening is the insects, some of them just happen to have, again, that random variation or mutation. And when they're introduced to the pesticide, they didn't know it, but it just doesn't have an effect on them.
It's just like some people, when they get the coronavirus, get very, very sick, and some people don't, right? It's like some people have a different reaction to certain diseases than other people, just like these bugs would have different reactions to pesticides.
Exactly.
All right. So here's an example of the same concept Mr. Nell was talking about with pesticides, but this is applying it to something that you all have probably been on, antibiotics. So let's say you have a bunch of bacteria invading your cells, okay? And there's variation, and there just happens to be this one here, which they colored purple to show you that this one bacteria that's infecting you has got some kind of trait that makes it resistant to the medication that you take. So they put you on antibiotics. Maybe that pink bubblegum medicine, they still make that, Mr. Nella, for kids?
I haven't seen, you know what?
My kids love
I remember
that
Tommy had it, so a couple of years ago, but.
My kids used to beg the doctor for it because it tasted so good. Probably full of sugar. Anyway, so this one doesn't care about that medicine and it survives. Killed all the others, but now you still have that one cell. Well, this bacteria is asexual. It's going to make copies of itself. So now maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, your body still has an infection because it did not kill all the bacteria. This one had a resistant gene that allowed it to survive. So now you've got a colony of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in your body.
So is that same, like if you go back to the doctor now and these are the bacteria that are making you sick, if they prescribe the same medication, is that going to work on this colony?
I don't think so because they all have the same genetic trait that's going to make them resistant. So they have to probably prescribe a different medication, and hopefully that one will knock them out.
And the same thing with the farmers. They might use one pesticide spray 1 month, and then they use a different pesticide the next month, kind of alternate them to try to not allow these resistant populations to build up in the ecosystem or in your body.
They could do even better and use a natural predator, right, Mr. Noah?
That would be best. Yeah.
That avoids the ecological problems.
Yeah.
All right. So this is just the same thing I just showed you, so we don't really need to go into that. And I think that's it, Mr. Noah. I think that's all they need to know.
Let's you want to X out of the share screen?
Sure.
All right, there we go. We got a big picture of you now.
See, now really, you're seeing something different than me. Okay. Hi, guys.
It does look like you're in the Galapagos Islands. It looks like you're in the middle of a tropical forest.
That's
Except for the
nice.
swimming pool in the background.
Yeah, my pool is green though because it's still waiting to get.
Is that the spot in the back there where you chased all those baby deer out of your yard with the big stick?
Where?
Or, you know, right by that red bush. You know, remember you
Absolutely.
remember
No,
you
I'm
telling the
actually
kids?
in the fenced-in part of my yard right now, so the deer can't get in here.
Oh, you'd be surprised. I seen a deer
It was
just jump a
outside that
6 foot
gate.
fence like it was nothing.
What's that?
Do you ever see them back there? Because I've seen them jump a 6 foot fence like without a problem at all.
I haven't seen them back here, but I've seen their they made deposits back here.
Oh, okay.
So I have seen their remnants, but they don't hang out back here. I think they realize they're trapped and they try to get out pretty quick. So.
All right. Well, I just we're getting towards the end of this course, and you want to tell them that we're thinking about doing maybe a live thing towards the end.
Yeah, it'd be nice. So maybe during that last week of school when we're doing makeup work.
Yeah, we'll do a live Zoom, and it'll be whoever wants to join in and say hi, and we'll see if we could get everyone together and maybe hang out for a little while.
I'd like to see most of their faces.
Yeah, well, we could X out the ones we don't.
Oh, no, true. Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. All right.
All right.
Guys.
I'm gonna end the screen recording here, guys, and go do the questions now.